The image of a loner, beavering away in a badly lit attic, only to emerge with a brilliant idea, is the stuff of romantic fantasy. The reality is that we do most of our work with other people. In fact, we have such a fundamental belief in the value of teams, we've written it into a proverb. 2 heads are better than 1. And that makes sense, because the problems that we're trying to solve are complex and difficult. The simple stuff has been done, and if it was easy, we'd do it ourselves. So naturally, when we get stuck, when we want a different perspective, we turn to the person next to us and we say, "What do you think?" But there's a problem. Well, not just one problem. The first problem is this. When we turn to the person to the left of us, or we turn to the person on our right, or we pick up our phone and speed dial our favourite, we are probably talking to someone who's very similar to us. That's the effect of similarity attraction bias, or homophily. We love people, phily, who are more similar to us, homo, than different. Sure, they might say tomato, and you might say tomato, but here's their view of the world, and here's your view of the world, and there's the overlap. And that carries with it obvious risk. In fact, Professor Scott Page out of Michigan University said, when you solve problems from dominantly one perspective, you're building in an error rate of about 30%. You are making mistakes. And to a degree we recognise that, because I hear a lot of people talking about diversity of thinking. Thing is though, we're not quite sure what that looks like. About 5 years ago, I started reading everything I could find on the topic of diversity of thinking and decision making. There was a lot more opinion than fact. And my team and I started doing research. And because we work in the real live workplace, our research was real and practical. It was not just in books, it was in the workplace. Not all smooth sailing, made some mistakes along the way. The biggest mistake was this: to think that you can throw a problem at a crowd of people and diversity of thinking will fill their knowledge gaps. Take it from me, it doesn't work. People have to know what they're talking about. There has to be a level of capability there. But we had some great breakthroughs, and I want to share them with you. I want to share what made me smarter and what can make you smarter as well. The first breakthrough is this. We found that there are 6 different ways that people approach problem solving, and all of them are equally important. Trouble is, we tend to be good at just 1 or 2. You can work out what your individual strength is by imagining this scenario and answering this question. Scenario. You're in a team meeting. There's a problem on the table that everyone is trying to solve, and the conversation is swirling around you. And you know at any point, and it's coming soon, they're going to focus on you and they're going to say, "What's your view?" You're only going to be able to ask one question, and it's going to be your most important question. So what's it going to be about? Are you going to ask about outcomes? Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? Are you going to ask about options? What are the possibilities? What's been done before? Are you going to ask about process? How are we going to implement this solution? What's the steps that we're going to take? Are you going to ask about people? Who are the people that we're trying to solve for? How do they feel about the problem? How do they feel about the solution? Are you going to ask about evidence? How do we even know this is a problem? What data are we relying upon? How are we going to track our success? Or are you going to ask about risk? What could go wrong? What are the scenarios we need to plan for? Put up your hand if it was outcomes. If it was options. Process? People? Evidence? Risk. 93% of the people that we surveyed, and we surveyed thousands, said, just like you, that one of those things was more important than the other. The other 7%, 2 of those things were important to them. And what that means is that each of us has the headline and the detail on that very important question. And on the other ones, were a little bit sketchy. When we surveyed senior leaders, 75% of them said that outcomes and options were the most important things to be focused on when you're solving a problem. Just pause for a second, because that's really big. What it means is they're working in an echo chamber, and all they're hearing back to themselves all the time is outcomes and options and options and outcomes. And what they don't realise is that those other voices, those cognitively peripheral voices around people, process, evidence and risk are getting far less airtime. And the solutions that they're building do not incorporate in a balanced way those other four factors. When we looked at the bottom of organisations and we asked folk there, what do you think is the most important? 84% of them said, in equal measure, outcomes, options, people and process. And then level by level, they dropped away talking about people and process, and they just started talking about outcomes and options. Why? Because leaders like talking to people who talk about problems in the way that they do, so they selected themselves again, cloning. But humans are very adaptable, and when we know what's valued, that's what we do. But here's the good thing. When you know this stuff, you can make different choices. You can rebalance the conversation. And I found that great leaders, great thinkers, had already cottoned onto this. They did disciplined diversity of thinking. And I want to share with you 3 examples. The first example is President Obama. When he has a meeting of his advisors, he doesn't do random brainstorming. He asks each individual person to share their point of view, and then he plays it back to them until he's really certain that he understands it. And only then does he move on to the next person. Warren Buffett seeks out his critics. He wants to know those people who have a very different opinion than him, and he wants to hear it loud and clear. And then the last person, my favourite, is Charles Darwin. What he did on writing The Origin of Species was have a golden rule, and his golden rule was this: whenever he heard a point of view that contradicted his own, he wrote it down straight away. He knew if he didn't do that, that it would worm its way out of his head, because the bias to sameness of thinking, is really strong. And unless you force yourself to engage with a different point of view, you simply won't. So each of these folk were doing disciplined attention to diversity of thinking. They were taking that information in one-on-one. They were making the person sit down next to them. They were writing it down. Here's my final finding, and it's a little bit quirky. Paying attention to diversity of thinking is hard. And when something is hard, we tend not to do it. And psychologists call this going into a state of cognitive depletion, because the easier route is actually to do sameness of connections, sameness of information. Thank you.